Hello, I'm the Resolute Cartographer, and this is the story of what happened to Vault 94. When Fallout 76 was first released back in the fall of 2018, one of the aspects that differentiated it from its peers, aside from being a multiplayer Fallout game, was the world in which it's set. While most of the previously released games were set in a beige wasteland interrupted by ruined cities, Appalachia is home to 6 different visually distinct regions. Aside from the forest and to an extent the Savage Divide, these regions show the effects of man's destructive influence, and for the most part, this influence can be traced to the pre-war world rather than to the bombs that ended that world. Whether through strip mining or industrial sabotage, the destruction of these regions was well underway before the nuclear holocaust. One region more than any other can trace its nature to the actions of men in the aftermath of the bombs, the Mire. The forested hills and valleys that once constituted the region have given way to swampy terrain overgrown with rapidly growing invasive strangler vines. While the source of this environmental corruption was known to be Vault 94 by the survivors of the region, it wasn't until 2102 that the former dwellers of Vault 76 discovered exactly what happened within this previously sealed vault. When vaults like Vault 94 were constructed across the United States, they were intended to house a small portion of the local population in the case of nuclear war, but some were also given a special task or purpose. Vault 76, preserving the best and brightest. Vault 96, preserving animal biodiversity. Vault 92, preserving musical talent. Vault 94 was one of these special purpose vaults. In this case, it was tasked with preserving plant biodiversity. To facilitate this task, the vault was provided with a large seed bank, greenhouses, and even a Garden of Eden creation kit, or GECK. For the uninitiated, a GECK is a piece of miracle technology in the Fallout universe, capable of, among many other fantastic claims, transforming lifeless wasteland into verdant, fertile land. To populate this vault, Vault-Tec sought out a community of non-violent pacifists. Why these people in particular? Because aside from a few control vaults, Vault-Tec surreptitiously sought to use the vaults they built as contained experiments. In the case of Vault 94, Vault-Tec wanted to see how idealistic groups would react to extreme adversity, if they would adhere to ill-fated idealism or adjust to survive. Specifically, how non-violent pacifists would react to the mad world the bombs might create. Unfortunately for Vault-Tec, such a population would be hard to find locally, as the service area for the vault would be in a region known for its contentious politics rather than pacifism. Harpers Ferry and its surroundings were home to a survivalist, separatist political organization known as the Free States. Fearful that the incompetence of elected officials would lead to a nuclear war with China, members of the Free States had constructed fallout shelters across the area. In the time before they retreated into these bunkers, the Free States members and the patriotic citizens of Harpers Ferry would often enter political arguments that ended as brawls in the streets. With all the rancor and violence, Vault-Tec needed some help to find their target population for Vault 94. Luckily, one of their employees had some people in mind, his ex-wife's congregation. Before he joined Vault-Tec, Antonio Salavar had been married to Reverend Gabriela Salavar, the head of a community built on faith, non-violence, and communal life in harmony with nature. Whatever the event or events are that led to their divorce and Antonio Salavar's excommunication from the community aren't known, but he still cared for his ex and their daughter, Angelique. Mr. Salavar recommended Gabriela's congregation to Vault-Tec, and they reached out to her. Salavar's people were offered habitation in a vault specifically designed to meet their needs. Along with the already extant greenhouses, the specifications for the vault would also include the following. First, instead of the standard setup of a full staff of Vault-Tec trained specialists, there would just be one maintenance technician, and the congregation would fill all the other roles. Second, instead of individual residences, the people would live communally. Third, instead of an overseer, they would have a governing council. Fourth, they would be given vast quantities of supplies, enough not only to survive the bombs but also to assist those who would survive outside the vault. Fifth, and lastly, in accordance with their peaceful ways, the vault wouldn't come equipped with any weapons, security robots, or turrets. With the Reverend's acceptance of their offer, Vault-Tec prepared the vault for their habitation. This process would be completed Thursday, October 21st, 2077, when Vault-Tec sent the skeleton crew occupying the vault decryption keys that revealed their operational orders. All but the maintenance engineer, Tyrone Hayes, left for Vault-Tec University. Tyrone's orders were to remain behind as the vault's special overseer, a role that gave him no authority within the vault, but left him to observe the dwellers. He was even given a secure channel to contact Vault-Tec with reports of his observations. He was instructed to minimize his interactions with the dwellers so as to avoid contaminating the experiment. Tyrone contacted Reverend Salavar, letting her know that the vault was ready should the day it was needed arrive. He didn't have long to wait. Just 2 days later, on the morning of Saturday, October 23rd, 2077, the bombs came down. Tyrone immediately contacted the Reverend again, urging her to bring her people as quickly as possible. Though located in a remote region far from any obvious strategic targets that would draw a nuclear strike, fallout would begin to fall within hours of the blasts. This was of grave concern to the dwellers, as the vault's door was designed to automatically seal protectively as radiation rose to levels too dangerous for the seed banks. Unfortunately, because the region hadn't been a fertile source of pacifists that Vault-Tec had been looking for, they had to seek out subjects in a more distant locale. Reverend Salavar's congregation arrived at noon, over 2 hours after the bombs dropped, and that was just the first wave. Tyrone was expecting a second bus to arrive in the afternoon. He sought to forestall the detection of the increased radiation by the vault's sensors, covering them with tarps in order to save as many lives as he could. By 1:30 they couldn't be tricked anymore, and the door began to seal. While everyone who had managed to arrive got inside before the door sealed, it wasn't until an hour and a half later, 3 p.m., that the last bus arrived. Tyrone had done everything he could to get them all inside. The vault door was designed not to open for a full year after those sensors tripped. They had nothing to do but listen to those outside pound on the door in vain. The mandatory year-long shelter period started rough in the aftermath of the botched arrival. Despite all he had done to save as many lives as possible, Tyrone knew that Reverend Salavar blamed him for the lives lost. Unable to sleep that first night, Tyrone went for a walk around the vault. Around 2 a.m., he found Reverend Salavar's daughter, Angelique, crying in the atrium. They sat and talked for a while. Though happy to be alive, Tyrone was furious with Vault-Tec. These people didn't deserve to be made part of an experiment, and he didn't want to be a part of it either. He noted in his log that he regretted ever attending Vault-Tec University. Over the coming weeks, the congregation began to unwind from the shock of the apocalypse and fell into a pattern of life. The dwellers moved into their new roles, working in engineering, cooking, cleaning, and raising the community's children. In the greenhouses, they grew food and ran agricultural experiments to prepare for the time when they would emerge again. These experiments ranged from crop hybridization, to understanding how the altered climate would affect crop yields, to examining how radiation and chemical contaminants could affect the plants. While he was typically busy taking all these maintenance jobs, Tyrone felt like an outsider when he really had time to consider his position. Everyone else knew each other, and even though he didn't really want to just observe them as Vault-Tec had instructed, the dwellers kept him at an arm's length. They held religious services, potluck dinners, lectures, and discussions to pass the time and to maintain their community. As the new year rolled around, the relationship between Tyrone and Angelique Salavar, which had begun in the early morning hours of October 24th, was stronger than ever. She worked as an aide in the nursery, which suited Tyrone just fine, as he had always liked kids. The Reverend, though, was less than thrilled with this, and she did what she could to monitor the situation either directly or through subordinates. Not only was he an outsider, she had never forgiven him for the losses on the day of the bombs. The dwellers had formed their governing council as planned, and by March Tyrone had joined as a technical advisor. This was strictly prohibited by his orders, but he figured that not going would cause more issues for the experiment than going would. If he didn't go, the dwellers might grow suspicious of him, making his observations less useful than before. While he might have intended to keep himself out of the community at that time, he would be drawn deeper and deeper in over the ensuing months. By the end of May, he was even attending the religious services and considered the dwellers to be his friends. While he didn't perhaps hold the same beliefs as they did, for someone like him who had grown up with a solitary life, living with the community was intoxicating. On August 28, 2078, Tyrone and Angelique announced their engagement to the Vault Council. While Reverend Salazar wasn't happy, the rest of the assembly congratulated them. Though Tyrone had been hoping for a better relationship with his mother-in-law-to-be, Angelique told him to just give her time to process things. Life in the vault continued, with weekly fish fries and lectures on Friday, sharing markets, services, and council meetings on Sundays. Tyrone continued his work in maintenance, dealing with issues that ranged from supposed clogged toilet emergencies to lost teddy bears getting caught in reactor turbines. By October, the mandatory shelter period was coming to a close, and Reverend Salazar was presenting her ambassador program to the Vault Council. The idea was to send representatives of the Vault out to the population centers across the wastes and invite them back to share their resources. Tyrone knew this was a mistake. The world outside was not going to be like it was before. People weren't just going to share in the resources, they were going to take them and kill anyone in the way. He couldn't let these people sacrifice themselves in their ignorance. On October 16, 2078, he confessed the truth to the council. He told them everything. That they'd been part of an experiment. That he was the special overseer that had been watching them. Most importantly, he told them of Vault-Tec's hypothesis on the outcome of this experiment. The world outside would be incredibly dangerous. If the dwellers didn't adapt or abandon their pacifist ideology, they would die. He knew that they wouldn't abandon their ideology, and he didn't want them to either. He was one of them now. He wanted them to keep the door shut. Reverend Salavar felt vindicated, telling him that she was right about him all along. Angelique was stunned by this revelation, giving Tyrone a look of horror that she'd never used before. In spite of his efforts, the Vault Ambassador program passed 10-1. At 1:30 p.m. October 23, 2078, 1 year after the apocalypse, the vault door opened again. The community went outside, prayed for the victims of the war, and blessed the 17 ambassadors that left to carry out the missionary work. Over the coming weeks, volunteers tended a garden outside the vault, hoping to see what would grow in the irradiated soil. On October 28th, the vault established a front desk with a weapons check for visitors. Notably, the man who held the job of running this weapons check was given the title of Usher rather than Security. When the council met again on October 30th, 2078, Tyrone proposed a security preparedness/self-defense training program, which was subsequently voted down 10-1. Terrified of what horrors the Vault ambassadors might bring back, on November 13th, 2078, he proposed recalling the ambassadors and sealing the vault. This was also voted down 10-1. In its place, the council voted 10-1 to create the Welcome Day program for visitors. On November 18th, Tyrone worried they were just about to be destroyed. The Vault ambassadors were still out a couple more days, but maybe they could just close the doors and go back to the way things had been over the past year. The council was sure he was wrong, that survivors would see the futility of war, that they would want peace. Sunday, November 20th, 2078, Welcome Day, started with a sunrise service and a good deal of excitement. Just before noon, a handful of wastelanders arrived at the vault, a delegation from Harper's Ferry. These four, Cole, Red, Lucas, and Billy, demanded to know who was in charge before ignoring the weapons check and heading straight for the council chambers. They entered just as Reverend Salavar was calling the meeting to order. She attempted to greet the men before they shouted her down. It became immediately obvious that they viewed the enthusiastic welcome as bait for a trap, and they leveled their guns at the council. As Reverend Salavar attempted to assure these four that they were a peaceful community, that they wanted to share their wealth, they shot her. Their leader, Cole, then ordered his men to gun down the rest of the council. These invaders from Harper's Ferry then took charge of the vault, voting to open the GECK wing, which had been sealed since June of 2077. When they entered it and they found the Garden of Eden creation kit, they had no concept for what it was. Assuming it might be a religious relic or even a mind control device, Cole ordered Red to fire his minigun into it. The GECK had a nuclear reactor in it. As the 5mm ammunition tore through its case, it exploded in a level 6 nuclear event, sending a surge of radiation measured at 7,800 rads per second out to a radius of 5.5 kilometers. The GECK monitoring system estimated that this event caused significant mutation for anything that survived within the approximately 37 square miles surrounding the vault. Red strangler vines burst forth with such speed and strength that they even managed to entangle those within the vault that had survived the initial blast of radiation. The vault flooded, likely as part of a protocol from the emergency management system, and the resulting damage can be seen to this day. At a nearby Free States bunker, the same red vines burst through their walls as well. In Harper's Ferry and across the Mire, they felt the earth shake as the GECK exploded. Miranda Vox, mayor of Harper's Ferry, had sent the delegation, not realizing what they would do when they arrived. Scouts reported that a strange cloud could now be seen emanating from the entrance of Vault 94. The region was now well on its way to becoming the Mire as the strangler vines began to grow further and further out from the vault. The Free States members exited their bunkers and arrived in Harper's Ferry in the summer of 2079. Following a chat with Miranda Vox, Ella Ames, one of the more savvy members of the Free States, correctly guessed that the GECK had been improperly utilized. This vault, that started with the goal of preserving and regenerating the plants of the world, ended up being a major source of biological corruption. Tyrone Hayes had been right. The world outside was too dangerous for the community of Vault 94 to contend with, but he never could have foreseen just how quickly things would fall apart. A couple of notes here before we move on to my thoughts about all that's happened here. First, Vault 94 has been opened twice since Fallout 76 came out, once with the Nuclear Winter update, and once again with the One Wasteland update. During the Nuclear Winter update, Vault 94 was part of the Vault Raids content, and players were expected to solve issues within the Vault as part of a group. This wasn't really my kind of thing, and the one time I attempted one of these Vault Raids solo, it did not go well. My general impression was that there were numerous technical issues and that potential rewards didn't justify the required expenditure of ammunition and meds. The vault raids don't seem to have been received with a great amount of enthusiasm by the player base, and the concept was removed before they even opened Vaults 96 and 63, which had also been slated for this style of gameplay. When the vault opened again, the layout was revised, with the residential section ending up sealed. For the most part, all the information that could be found in this older version of the vault can be found in the current version, just on different terminals. The only real lost information, as far as I can see at least, was specifically related to the vault raids themselves, and their loss didn't really destroy any lore. Along with this, let me just say that I got the 17 number for the number of vault ambassadors from the 17 dead vault ambassadors that can be found across the wasteland. These 17 can be found as far south as Harper's Ferry and as far west as Brickett's Fort. While we don't really know exactly how many were sent out, we do know that at least these 17 unarmed, friendly missionaries were killed by Wastelanders. Maybe Vault 94 sent out more than this, but this number works for me. With that said, I'll move on to my thoughts about this location and the events that transpired here. First, I think this is one of the more interesting vault experiments. Much of the time they seem to have almost a cartoonish supervillainy to them, but this one seems like it could actually have produced some useful information on the behavior of ideological groups. Just like the other experiments, this one is unethical due to the number of innocent lives that hung in the balance, but I think that this result would have shocked even Vault-Tec. I'm not saying that they weren't expecting some of these unarmed pacifists to be murdered by raiders from outside, but I think the stupidity with which the Harper's Ferry raiders treated the GECK is truly mind-boggling. How one can think, let's fire a minigun into this unknown object which seems to be emitting radiation, is baffling to me. While I do think this is one of the more interesting experiments, I don't think that it was very well designed. Populations generally shift over time. Sudden changes generally require sudden and terrible events to take place. Part of the population would have to survive the first contact with hostile outsiders to change. Undoubtedly, the idealism of Reverend Salavar was a chief driver of the destruction of the community, but Vault-Tec built the vault with this idealism in mind. If Vault-Tec had done something like concealed security turrets and only made their presence known in the case of an attack, this would have tested the ideology of the Council and given them the means to continue to make more decisions going forward. The complete lack of protection meant that a handful of men with guns were able to end the experiment before the people even had a chance to examine their conscience. Second, it's interesting that Tyrone Hayes was given a direct line to Vault-Tec for this experiment. It's not really something that we've seen with the others. Usually they would just wait for the experiment to run out, or they were waiting for an all clear, but there was no connection otherwise. Third, I find it odd that the diehards seem to have killed the Vault ambassadors. We know that at least 2 of the ambassadors reached the Sunnytop ski lanes, the headquarters of the diehards. The diehards maintained a protective relationship with the survivors of the Palace of the Winding Path in exchange for payments of drugs. Why they wouldn't want a piece of the food that could be produced at Vault 94, especially given how close it was to their territory, is odd to me. There are caveats to this. First, it was just a year after the bombs. We don't really know that the diehards really were the diehards yet. It took some time for the separate gangs to form, so this may have just been general raiders at this point. Along with this, they may have thought this was a trap, just like the Harper's Ferry group did. Moving past the diehards, I liked that in Vault 94, we see another use of the emergency management system. I first covered the EMS and its creator, Eric DeMarcos, in my lore video on Vault 96. Here again, we can see Dr. DeMarcos guiding his students through the creation of new programs for the EMS database. Fifth, if the GECK reactor had never blown, the Mire would be a very different place today. Ignoring assumptions about how different society may have been if the population of the vault survived, the biology of the Mire was massively impacted by the radiation of the explosion and the mutated plants that it caused. Some survivors have mentioned that the area became more swampy since the explosion. The red strangler vines are everywhere. The wildlife has been altered. I've speculated in the past that the reason that the cranberry bog and the mire don't represent each other more is that the beavers that have deforested the cranberry bog don't tangle with the red strangler vines. And as such, I have to assume to a certain extent that the region that Vault 94 turned into the Mire might have ended up just as deforested without the vines. Sixth, had Vault 94 stayed closed until the same time the next year, they would have emerged to find the Free States and Taggarty's Thunder running the Mire area. I have to think that this would have been a completely different interaction, with either group potentially providing security to the vault regardless of the desires of the Council. The vault opened before any real post-war stabilization had taken place, and they were not equipped for that kind of world. And lastly, I've considered the possibility that Antonio Salavar, Reverend Salavar's husband, may have wanted this to happen to his wife. He was the one who originally recommended her community for the vault, and given that he worked for Vault-Tec, he was in more of a position to know about the experiment. I don't think this is likely though, as he also knew that she would bring their daughter with her, and regardless of the state of his relationship with his wife, I don't think that most vengeful exes want to harm their children. Anyway, I think that's enough speculation and enough on Vault 94. If you want to get notifications when I launch these lore videos, you can follow me at Gaming with Maps on Twitter. If you appreciate what I do here and want to support the channel financially, you can become a patron on Patreon. To that end, I want to thank my patrons Mesothelioma, 76 of Texas, and Jill AWS for their support. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.